Sean McDermott has been fired by the Buffalo Bills, and while you think he might be a shoo-in to get a head coaching job, I'm still going to slide him right in there at number 2 for our preferred defensive coordinators list.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network in the world. And I'm David Harrison, your guy on the ground, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9. Also writing for Commanders on SI, here with you 5 days a week. And coming up on this bonus episode of Locked On Commanders, Al Harris is still not landing on my list of potential defensive coordinator candidates. But first, why Sean McDermott is now number 2 on that list. All that coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sean McDermott of the Buffalo Bills, formerly of the Buffalo Bills, was fired on Monday morning following the Buffalo Bills overtime loss in the divisional round of the playoffs to the Denver Broncos. And when I look at Sean McDermott, I see a coach who knows what system he wants to run, but also knows how to work with the players that he's got. So it's a little bit of a combination of approaches here. Re-ranking our top 3 candidates of the defensive coordinator candidates out there. Brian Flores is still the number 1 guy. He's the aggressor. He's the architect of several different iterations of his own defense, all of them aggressive. Now, certainly could still be getting a head coach opportunity. He does have a second interview with the Pittsburgh Steelers coming up this week, had one interview with the Baltimore Ravens, and as far as we've heard, has not been invited back for a second interview with the Ravens. So it looks like Steelers or Commanders, because the Commanders are the only team that he's interviewed as a defensive coordinator even. So it looks like Steelers, Commanders, or Vikings. So whether it's by function or whether it's by force, basically the Washington Commanders are in the top 3 for Brian Flores. It would appear as of what we know publicly right now. Number 2 is going to be Sean McDermott, the aforementioned now fired head coach of the Buffalo Bills. We'll talk about him here more in depth in just a little bit. And then number 3 on my list, I've actually moved Carl Scott above Jonathan Gannon. I've been keeping Jonathan Gannon at that 3rd spot just because of the level of experience and all that kind of stuff. But you know what, man, the more I look at Carl Scott, Seattle Seahawks defensive backs coach and pass game coordinator, the more I like. And he's got 15 years of coaching experience, through Alabama, through all, we broke that down in an episode earlier this week, or late last week rather. So the more I see him, I'm good with Carl Scott, man. That's the way that Dan Quinn decides to go. But let's talk about Sean McDermott, one of the new addition to the rankings here this early this week. Does not like to play with a heavy defense, right? He doesn't really like to stick in a base defensive look. So 4-3, 3-4, things like that, really not his bag. Really likes to live in nickel and dime. So he likes the 5-6 DB looks for his defense. Even against the run, he's much more of a swarm to the ball type of a dude versus a just stand you up at the point of attack with one big guy or with a big front, things like that. And that's kind of his way of dictating the tempo, right? So it's a level of aggression just in a different sort of way, right? Think like, I don't know, to make a bad analogy, think of like a kung fu fighter who's going to be a little bit smaller, but he's going to use his speed. And he's going to dictate the fight by making you play to his speed, making you play to his size. Whereas Brian Flores is more, if he's got the personnel to be able to do it, he's more of the kind of beefed up boxer who's just going to hit you with a jaw-jacking punch and knock you to the ground. Both guys play aggressively. One just looks a little bit different stylistically in Sean McDermott's style, but he's also proven in his history that he's going to adapt to who he has on the roster. So and that's kind of why I say he's got that rigid, I know what I want to be, I know what I want my defense to be, but he also has shown that ability to be adaptable, which is obviously something incredibly enticing, I should say, attractive in a defensive coordinator candidate. 2019 was mainly single high. Before 2022 even was kind of single high for the majority of the time as a D coordinator, as a coach. But 2022 to 2024 really saw a shift to using split safety looks, kind of keeping the 2 safeties kind of, molding with the times, molding with the roster, understanding it's a passing league and teams were going after big shots more and more. And then he eventually, I should say, ran into sort of a 3-3-5 look, which is something we saw the Washington Commanders try to do this year as well. But Sean McDermott just a little bit more successful in coordinating that and identifying the players he needed to do that. So again, knows what he likes to do. So you see the 5-6 DBs across the board there, but whether they're single high, whether they're split safety, whether they're 3-3-5, all that kind of stuff, that's where he kind of shows that flexibility within the style that he likes to play, even in his down years as the head coach, obviously Buffalo, but defensive coordinator, just specifically for our point of conversation. 11th ranked defense was one of his floors, which would be great for the Washington Commanders. Listening to Joe Marino, Locked On Bills, he did an emergency episode after the news broke on Monday. Says there was obvious friction between Sean McDermott and GM Brandon Beane. I'm not personally worried about that friction because, look, Sean McDermott's been in Buffalo for 9 years. If it took 9 years of frustration building in order for that to become kind of a tipping point, I think we can all kind of understand where that would go. But Brandon Beane also was kind of the guy who opened the door to it, publicly criticizing the defense, knowing that your head coach is kind of wheelhouse out there. Joe Marino also said that if if Sean McDermott wants to be a head coach, he's going to be a head coach again. And I tend to agree with him. I think Sean McDermott is going to be an attractive head coaching offer or option. I think he's certainly going to get some invites to interview here late in the coaching cycle. We say it's late in the coaching cycle, but only 2 of the now 10 open jobs. Granted, one of those jobs is Buffalo, so not open to Sean, but there are 7 jobs that could theoretically be open to Sean McDermott's interview. I think, he's going to be a head coaching candidate this year. I think he's going to be a head coaching candidate next year. If he comes to Washington and does a really good job and the Commanders end up with one of those 11th ranked defenses in Sean McDermott's first year, it's very possible that he's going to get a head coaching offer in 2027. And I know for some of you, that's a problem. That's a red flag. For me, that's not a red flag. Listen, I'm never going to be afraid of success. So I'm never going to come into one of these things and be like, but if you hire this guy in 2026, you're going to have to just hire again in 2027 because it's going to be successful and he's going to go somewhere else. Like, don't threaten me with a good time is kind of the saying that comes up. Listen, if we're dealing with such a successful Washington Commanders 2026 campaign that we're worried about Sean McDermott leaving in 2027, that means we all had a really fun 2026. And as of right now, I'm only going to worry about 2026. I'm not going to worry about what's going to happen in 2027 because between now and then, as we've experienced in the 2025 NFL season, what happens in the span of 12 months can be a whole lot different than what you expect it to be. So, like I said, if we're celebrating a successful year, fingers crossed, could it be a Super Bowl year for the Washington Commanders? And because of it, we got to worry about Sean McDermott leaving to be a head coach somewhere else. I'm going to be okay with that personally. I'm not going to be afraid of that success. Speaking of leaving in 2027, maybe Al Harris could be a candidate in 2027 if Sean McDermott were to come to Washington now and be hired away next season, because he sure doesn't seem to be one right now. That coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you in part by Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best time for sports. We just lived through this amazing stretch of bowl games. Still got the NFL or NCAA championship game to come. Big basketball matchups continuing even beyond the holiday season. Playoff pushes are coming to an end right now. AFC, NFC championship game this weekend, then a couple more weeks, and it's all about the Super Bowl. And all of it is happening all the same stretch of the calendar season while we're all making choices every single day. One of the most fun places, one of the best places to make those decisions and be right is with Prize Picks, because Prize Picks is the best way for you to get into daily fantasy sports. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, lock in that lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in many states, including California, Texas, Florida, Georgia, and Virginia, where I live. Prize Picks adds an extra layer of excitement to your sports schedule, and in creating a lineup takes you less than a minute if you wanted to, because the app makes everything so smooth and so intuitive. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL. Get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup with Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. Today's episode, bonus episode of Locked On Commanders, also brought to you in part by Robinhood, where they ask, what if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market where you can buy or sell all your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action, so when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator, play-by-play. You decide, trade every play with Robinhood, now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is also brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is clearly in playoff mode, has been ever since the beginning of the NFL playoffs, and continuing into championship weekend every single game day during the NFL playoffs. FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action, because right now, every playoff game day, FanDuel users are getting a profit boost pack waiting for you inside the app. Every game day, you're going to see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can then apply to the bets that you like the most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day. See what boost you want to apply. Those boosts let you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching. The boost is going to give you more juice on the bets you already like, instead of forcing you to bet on something you don't necessarily feel comfortable with. You make your picks, then you apply your profit boost your way. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every day the NFL is in the postseason. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. To the everydayers that come through for every single episode, special thank you comes to you, or goes out to you, for coming through for yet another episode, this bonus episode of Locked On Commanders. If you haven't already, please check out the Everydayer Club, lockedoncommanders.supercast.com, literally made for the most dedicated Washington Commanders fans. So while we add a target to our defensive coordinator's candidate list, Sean McDermott, now former head coach of the Buffalo Bills, being added to that list, we got to take a candidate off of your list. Not every single one of your lists, but most of your lists. And that is Jeff Ulbrich. I know Jeff Ulbrich has been a target of a lot of Washington Commanders fans, even some media members, things like that. We've not put him on our list because, truthfully, just never really saw the writing on the wall that he was actually going to be available. The Atlanta Falcons were blocking him from any interviews because ownership said, look, he's still under contract. We want to keep him, and we want whoever we hire as a head coach to at least consider keeping him. And the thing about these situations is, most of the time, now not every time, but most of the time, when a coach is being blocked from interviews, they're at least okay with being blocked from those interviews, which means that Jeff Ulbrich somewhere in the background was telling Arthur Blank and telling the team, yeah, guys, I'm good. Like, I would like to stay here as well. So let's get the head coach hired and let's go from there. So that's just kind of the writing on the wall. Sure enough, Kevin Stefanski gets the Atlanta Falcons head coaching job. And then on Monday, it's announced that Jeff Ulbrich and the Atlanta Falcons have agreed on a new 3-year deal. So he is sticking around. Raheem Morris, the fired head coach from the Atlanta Falcons, I know a lot of people want him in there. Obviously, the history is there between he and the organization. I like Raheem Morris, a lot personally. But he's just never kind of been on the radar, it seems, for the Washington Commanders, so we haven't put him on the list. Now, again, if we get word that they're actually interviewing him, it'd be really late in the cycle for whatever reason to open up an interview for a guy. But if that happens, we will talk about him more in depth. Another guy that has gotten even more attention from the fan base and from other media members that also is not on the Washington Commanders radar, it would seem, but really isn't on anybody's radar, is Al Harris, defensive coordinator, or defensive backs coach, and I believe defensive pass game coordinator, if I'm not mistaken, for the Chicago Bears, at least defensive backs coach for the Chicago Bears. Now, from 2020 to 2024, Al Harris was part of the Dallas Cowboys coaching staff that also included Dan Quinn, right? Also included a lot of folks. And from that point in time, the Dallas Cowboys were really great going after the ball. 72 interceptions during that 5-season stretch that Al Harris was part of that staff. Currently with the Chicago Bears staff, his first year this year with the Chicago Bears. However, now that the Chicago Bears have been eliminated from the playoffs, zero buzz, at least at the time of the recording, zero confirmation, zero reports out there of Al Harris getting an actual interview with anybody. Dallas Cowboys fans all had Al Harris on their radar. Obviously, Commanders fans had Al Harris on the radar. The connection makes sense between he and Dan Quinn and all that kind of stuff, but really no confirmation that he's interviewing anywhere, let alone for the Washington Commanders defense coordinator spot. And that has even been requested. And truthfully, even as the Chicago Bears have been in the postseason, like, they can do these, virtual interviews early in season, early in playoff weeks, and and all that stuff, just like they did with Carl Scott, defensive backs coach and defensive pass game coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. So if they wanted to interview him, there were avenues to do it, not in person until after the Bears were eliminated, but usually you would see that virtual interview take place at least even while the Bears were in there. So I know there's a lot of internet buzz about Al Harris, but, look, the coaching world is kind of telling you that for whatever reason, one reason or another, like he's maybe not the attractive candidate that we on the outside might think that he is. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have that future. And that's what I'm kind of saying. Like if Sean McDermott comes in or Brian Flores comes in, and those guys are the ones that I hear the most of, like, well, they'll only be here for 1 year, then they're going to get a head coaching job in 2027. First of all, look around at what's going on with Brian Flores. I don't know that you can guarantee that he's going to get a head coaching job opportunity in 2027. Second of all, great season if that's actually what happened. Third of all, every single year that teams go through this, there are sexy quote unquote offers or opportunities or whatever out there. Don't forget Brian Flores, Sean McDermott, if they come in here, they're also, going to be charged to develop the coaches underneath them. So these coaches underneath them are continuing to get developed. And, maybe it's a guy like Darryl Tapp or whoever is also getting more experience in the systems. And they might also bring, Brian Flores, there might be an assistant DB coach in Minnesota that he loves that he's going to bring with him to be, the DB coach in Washington, which would be a promotion. So the Minnesota Vikings couldn't block that. Sean McDermott could obviously do the same thing in Buffalo, things like that. And I'll tell you right now, if that staff in Buffalo agrees with Sean McDermott to the extent, or Joe Marino Locked On Bills, to the extent that it's more of a roster management situation that happened in Buffalo versus a coaching situation that happened in Buffalo, they're probably going to be a good amount of defensive coaches on that staff that don't really want to stick around Buffalo to stay with Brandon Beane. They'd probably rather follow Sean McDermott to wherever he goes. So again, those types of things are always in play. And then Carl Scott, obviously, I don't think many people are concerned about him being a one and done, just because it would be his first year as a defensive coordinator. But yeah, those issues, again, they kind of don't concern me. One, because again, invite me to the party. I'm going to enjoy the party while it lasts. I'm not going to worry about what comes after the party until the party is over. Two, their ability to develop coaches underneath them to potentially move up to be the next D coordinator of the Washington Commanders is always possible. And then three, I don't know, man. Just live in the moment. If there's good news, then there's good news. I know some insiders think that Jonathan Gannon's going to be the guy. Obviously, I've been a little bit low on him, but again, I've also said that if the Washington Commanders hired Jonathan Gannon, I would have to believe that in the interview process, they identified the same thing that I identified, because it's there, the kind of cookie cutter copy paste. Every year your defense kind of looks the same and really tends to rely on super powered pass rushers to win for you versus you scheming them open. He would have to have an answer for that, an answer that would satisfy Dan Quinn. And if Dan Quinn were interested in doing the same thing over and over again, probably wouldn't have fired his guy, Joe Witt Jr. So I have to believe those dots are going to connect. Anyway, that's going to do it for this bonus episode. Next time on Locked On Commanders, we'll dive even deeper into what's going on around the franchise. So make sure you are subscribed. Follow along with Locked On Commanders so you get all of the latest episodes. And in the meantime, you can follow me on X at DHarrison82 or on Instagram at DHarrison_82. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club, literally built for you as an everydayer. LockedOnCommanders.supercast.com to check that out. Also, make sure you check out Locked On NFL twice per day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. You get the national landscape of the league as a whole. To the everydayers, I see you. I appreciate you every day. And I thank you again for coming through today. To everybody out there, until next time, please stay safe, be kind to one another. We'll talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.